With this video, we would like to give you all the insights you need on how to integrate Microsoft Dynamics 365 for finance and supply chain management with digital software in a fast, flexible, and future-proof way. When it comes to integrating Dynamics 365 FNSCM with PIM, e-commerce platforms, or other software, there is one big challenge. The default OData web services that Dynamics 365 FNSCM delivers are missing crucial API data points needed, such as customer-specific B2B pricing, get available to promise customer-specific stock, real-time pricing for basket with order simulation, customer balances, open invoice amount, get warehouse stock locations and stock. To add to this, using the default OData endpoints are complex in general, and attempting to use them to acquire needed data can be incredibly tedious. To give you an example, simply requesting product information with OData points requires requesting data from several OData APIs, as shown here. Each API point will send you its information which you need to map to one data route in order to send it to your digital system. So please know that all of this will require you to have a lot of business knowledge of Dynamics 365 FNSCM and how OData API points work. And above all, using OData endpoints results in significant performance loss due to the large amount of OData calls you need to make in order to run your integration. So to summarize, working with default OData API points for digital commerce involves running a complex project, requiring expertise in Dynamics 365 logic, creating new custom API points for digital commerce, having to hire Microsoft consultants. To offer a significantly simpler alternative, Alumio offers a special API plugin that helps instantly install these lacking API points, also known as web services, into the Dynamics 365 ERP that are needed for digital commerce integrations. The Alumio API plugin is a proven and ready-to-use solution that adds the missing API points and requires no Dynamics 365 expertise to do the installation, prevents the need for custom coding and third-party support, and above all, it allows you to create fast and future-proof integrations. As your ERP now has the ability to connect more effectively with other software, you can start building your integrations. And with the current demand for digitalization, you'll probably need to integrate with more systems or customers in the near future. In order to help companies avoid getting bogged down with tangled IT landscapes when connecting to multiple systems, Alumio provides a cloud-based integration platform to organize all your integrations on one central hub. You can also use Alumio to integrate with any software, databases, APIs, SOAP, or connect to files to digitize your customers or suppliers via XML or EDI. You can use Alumio's user-friendly interface to create integrations yourself by using data mappings and platform features. Alumio also offers detailed monitoring and logging features that allow you to detect and resolve integration errors. And it ensures your integrations are secure, compliant, and that you are in full control of your data. In order to create integrations with Alumio, you start with creating connections to both the left side, called an incoming connection, and the right side, which is called an outgoing connection. The data route is the glue that connects the incoming and outgoing and will be your integration of a specific data flow. Based on the kind of integrations you want, you will need to create data routes such as customers, products, orders, stock, price, etc. And you can create these working integrations using Alumio's easy-to-use interface. Alumio will take care of the authentication and access, after which a stable connection is then created. This saves a lot of time. After creating a connection, the data of the connected system is available in Alumio. As you may already know, you need to make sure that the data of the incoming connection, shown here in the orange box, must be transformed to have the required format of the connected system, as shown in the purple box. As you can see in this example, the product data has a different structure. Name conventions has some data that needs to be filtered because it's not needed, and some data needs to be combined in order to meet the required format. If this is done, you may need additional business logic. For example, sending the order to a specific location based upon certain variables. As shown before, you can use Alumio's integration features to build this yourself. However, to help kickstart your integrations, Alumio's partners build pre-configured mappings and transformers as integration templates. These can be used and modified via our user-friendly interface. For connecting Dynamics 365 for finance and supply chain management to Magento, we provide an integration template to help kickstart your integration. It delivers the most important data routes, as you can see mapped in color. It includes data routes for customers, products, categories and attributes, B2C and B2B prices, orders and stock levels. And it converts them to a format that is compatible with Magento or your digital endpoint. Within the template, the integrations delivered in gold means that the data is mapped to the data schema of Alumio. The silver icons indicate that they are mapped as one-to-one. And the green label integrations mean that you can simply kickstart your integration using Alumio's easy-to-use interface. You can find the available integration templates on our website. They can be adjusted via Alumio's iPaaS in order to be fully flexible. Let's now switch to Jesse, our integration specialist, who will demonstrate how to integrate the Dynamics 365 FNS CM ERP with an e-commerce system, using the API plugin that installs the lacking API data points in the ERP.
I now like to introduce our integration specialist, Jesse, to show how to create a custom integration in the interface of Alumio. He will connect the orders from Dynamics 365 and send them to an FTP server, just to show you how you can create any flow you want. Jesse, floor is yours.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you. Yes, hello, my name is Jesse Buitenhuis, and thanks for watching. So last time we had this first webinar where we showed some basic integrations, and for today's webinar we will be creating a custom one which will be a bit more advanced. We are going to utilize more of the transformers that Alumio has to offer, so yeah, we really can tailor an integration to our needs. So as Dennis described, when we create an integration, what we call a route, we have two components. When we are creating a route, we can see that we can configure a incoming configuration, which is responsible for pulling the data to Alumio. And we can create an outgoing configuration, which is responsible for sending the data somewhere. So this is quite, still quite broad because, yeah, we can send data to Alumio, but via what protocols? Well, if we take a look at creating an incoming configuration, we can see that an incoming configuration uses a subscriber. And a subscriber is the component that's responsible for pulling the data from a system. So what we can do is we can create a custom component to connect to a REST API. So we can do RESTful interfaces such as Magento, Shopware, but also Dynamics Finance and Operations. We have a database subscriber in case I want to do direct database connections. So there's some older ERP systems which don't have a web service. In this case, it's useful. In this case, it's useful to directly connect to a database. So Alumio offers many of these subscribers to create a connection with an external system. But we also have a webhook subscriber. And with a webhook subscriber, we can enable an API endpoint for an external system to send data to Alumio. But in this case, what we are going to do, we are going to connect to Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations. We are going to read some order headers from that system, and we are going to send those to an FTP location. So before I start creating the incoming and the outgoing configuration, I need to configure the endpoints. Because often what you're going to do, you're going to connect to a system to which you are going to pull many types of data from. So the first system is Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations. So I will be going to clients and then to HTTP clients, and I've already provided a configuration for this system. So let me go ahead and open it. We can see I created an HTTP client for Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations. Down here, we see that an HTTP client uses various plugins. well, a plugin adds functionality to an HTTP client. So an HTTP client enables you to do API calls to a certain system, and those plugins enhance those API calls. So the first plugin that we have added is an add base URI to requests. As we can see, this contains a environment variable. That's what we call it. And this environment variable stores the information about the URL of the finance and operation system. Then down here, we have added a extra plugin to add the content type headers to the request. So if you're going to send JSON data to this API, then the server needs to know, because then the server knows, okay, I need to process JSON data. But we can also send XML, CSV, basically any type of content that we need to send to a system. But we don't want to manually configure those headers every time. So we let Alumio decide it based on the payload. And also we added a plugin to enable the logging. So obviously when we are going to connect to the system, messages will be created and we want to have the full visibility of what's happening. So in this case, I selected the full formatter. So what will happen is that Alumio will create full logging of everything that happens with this specific system. Also, I can add more plugins I would like to. So for example, we can enable caching right through the user interface. So now when we are requesting the same API endpoint within a given time frame, Alumio is able to cache the request. So instead of sending an actual request to the ERP system, Alumio will read the result from the cache. And this way you increase the performance of the integrations that you're going to build. So you're free to, in your own Alumio environment, check all the plugins that we have available. We have many of them, and they all make it easier for you to interface with an API in this case. Then down here, we can also see that I configured a authentication. And an authentication basically contains information for you to say, okay, I'm authorized to view those resources. So if I'm going to pull order information, the system needs to know, okay, you are entitled to do so. This authentication enables that functionality. We can also configure this from the user interface. So let me go ahead and open this authentication. We can see that we have an authentication configured here, which is for finance and operations. And when I open it up, we can see that down here, it uses an OAuth2 authentication with a generic provider where the grant type is client credentials. But of course, you can tailor it to your needs. So you can also do interactive authorization. This will redirect you to a login page. You can provide your credentials, and then Alumio will carry on from there. But we also have password, authorization code, all the common grant types that you would see with a OAuth2 authorization. Then down here, we can see that we have a client ID, a client secret, a token URL. Well, yeah, everything that's just specific to this OAuth2 authentication. So all you have to do then is press this button once, retrieve an access token key. I will just do so. Alumio will retrieve a key, it will store it in the cache, and Alumio will then use this key for each subsequent request. So I only have to configure this information once, and then every time I'm going to connect with this specific system, Alumio will read this key from the storage and apply it to each request. Okay, so when I go back to my HTTP client, we can see that I selected the authentication here. So I will go ahead and press save. So now we have created an HTTP client, and we have we have the component that's needed in order to create connectivity to finance and operations. Then we have a second endpoint, which is the FTP location, because we are going to pull orders from Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations, and we are going to send them to an SFTP location. So in order to do so, you have to configure a file system within Alumio. So I will go to storages and to file systems. Then here we can see that we have an Alumio SFTP location file system configured. Down here we see that I've selected the FTP over SSH option, but you can also connect to a direct FTP, but also to a Google Cloud Storage, an HTTP system, but also, for example, to a Amazon S3 bucket. Then down here we can see the specifics of this file system. So we have a host, which is also an environment variable, a username, password in this case. I've also defined a root directory where Alumio needs to connect to, and the rest of the information I've left as is. Now I will go ahead and press save again. I will go back to the overview and I will verify if the connection works, because sometimes an FTP location is behind the firewall, or you might make a mistake in the credentials. You just need to be ensured that whatever you configured also works. So we can go to the actions. We can click on the 3 dots, and then we can press on test connection. Now we see configuration successful. When I click on this, I can go to the logs. Not sure if it's going to create any for this case. No. So it's just going to say configuration successful, which means Alumio was able to connect to this specific system. So now we have the 2 endpoints configured. So we have an HTTP client to do the REST API calls to finance and operations, and we have a file system to interface with this SFTP directory. So now what I can do, I can create the incoming configuration to pull the order headers to Alumio, and I can create the outgoing configuration to write the XML files that we are going to create to this FTP or SFTP directory. So we'll go back to my connections, then to incoming. I'm going to create a new incoming configuration, and we will give this a name. So we can call this Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations, and we call this order headers, something like this. Then down here, I'm going to utilize the generic component, because we are creating a custom integration here. But yeah, we are going to do a REST API call, so we can use the HTTP subscriber that's designed to do all those API calls to whatever system. So we have a request URI. So here we only have to provide the endpoint because we already configured the base URL. So I will do it. I think the endpoint is /data/sales order headers, and let's for this purpose only pull the top 10. So we're going to pull the the top 10 sales order headers. I'm going to scroll down to the HTTP clients. Down here we will select the client that we configured, because then Alumio knows, okay, whenever I execute this configuration, I need to connect to this endpoint. And now when I press save and I run this configuration, we can see that the subscriber has been consumed. We can click on it and it will open this model. And we can also go to the logging. So now when I go to the logging, we can see the logs that were created as soon as I pressed on the run button. So we can see that Alumio sent a request to this specific endpoint. We can also see that Alumio added this host based on the HTTP client setting. So we only provided once, and then it's automatically added to each configuration where we connect to the specific system. We can also see the response. So we see the actual OData response from F&O. So we can see that we received one order header, and I think if we scroll down, we have another. And if I'm not mistaken, we will have 10 order headers. So when I close this, I can also go to the logging tab of my incoming configuration. So when I refresh this, we can also see all the processes that have been started, finished, or are still running. So we can see the status of the process. So this one has finished because we already run it. We already got a result. We can see how late it started, how late it finished, how long it took. So it took 1 second and 180 milliseconds. And we can also see how many tasks have been created. And of those created tasks, how many have been finished, how many have been filtered, or how many have been failed. So as you can see, still 0 tasks have been created. And if you also were here during the previous webinar, you would probably still remember that in order to get tasks, we need to have a route. Because this incoming configuration will only pull the data to Alumio, but as long as there's no route, so there's nothing to connect two systems to one another, Alumio will do nothing with the data. So what we will do, we will go ahead and we will create a outgoing configuration. And I'm going to call this outgoing configuration SFTP write order XML, something like this. And down here we can select the publisher, and this publisher is responsible for sending the data to a system. So again, we can connect to various types of systems. So as Dennis described, we can connect to APIs, SOAP APIs, databases, SFTPs, but also GraphQL. So there's a lot of possibilities to tackle your problem and create your integration. So in this case, we are going to connect to a file system because we connected this SFTP directory. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select the write files to a file system publisher. And this allows me to connect to this file system that we created and write files to that file system. So we'll have like a directory, and we are going to store the XML order files there. So what I then need to do, I need to configure the file system, which is in this case the Alumio SFTP. Then we can also say, okay, when a file exists, we want to do something. So we can overwrite the file. That's the default option, but we can also add an increasing number to the file name. So if it already exists, we can just add the extra files. So in this case, I'm just going to go with the default option of overwriting. Then down here, we have the configuration of, okay, how are we going to name the file? So we have a path, as you can see here. And what will be the contents of the file, which is the source. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to first configure the path. So we have two options. We can say, okay, get path from the data. This will be dynamically. So for example, we can take like the order number, and then we will send the order number. We will send the order number to, we will use the order number to create the XML file. Or we have a custom path, so we can also say, okay, it will be something like order.xml. But if we do this, yeah, as you can see, it's quite limited. So it really depends on your use case. So what we are going to do, we are going to get the path from the data, and which will be the order number. So this means we will need to introduce a key that's called order number. We can also apply mappers. So that's especially useful if you're going to add multiple fields and you need to combine them, or maybe you need to prepend the text with something. So actually, let's do that. So let's go here for a custom path. What we are going to do, we are going to create a file, and we are going to call it order with a hyphen. Then we're going to use a placeholder to take dynamic data. We are going to take the order number. Okay. And we're going to append it with .xml. So now for each order that we are going to process with this configuration, we will get an XML file that starts with order hyphen, followed by the order number, and it will be of the XML file extension. Now what I will do, I will add a mapper to this, and I'm going to call this a string prepend, and we're going to prepend it with Alumio hyphen. So now we would get a file that's called Alumio order number.xml. Then down here, we can provide a source. And again, we can take it from the data, which is dynamic, or we can do custom contents. But I will go with get contents from the data. And we will look for a key that's called order XML. But now, by default, within Alumio, you're always working with JSON. So even if you're reading XML from the source and you're sending XML to the destination, there will be a translation done by Alumio from XML to JSON and from JSON to XML. This is because we think it's easier to work with one unified data format within the system, and then we will take the hard work of translating the data from whatever data from the incoming format to JSON, and from JSON to the outgoing format. So in order to do this, we need to apply a mapper to this data. So what we're going to do, we are going to add a mapper, and it's called the serialize. We're going to serialize it with XML. And we will leave this as is. So now I'm going to save this. Okay, so now we created the incoming configuration to pull the data to Alumio. We created an outgoing configuration to send the data to this SFTP location. Now we can create a route to glue the two together. So we have a fully working integration. So we'll go to connections and then to routes. I'm going to create a new route, and we are going to call this sales order headers from D365 F&O to SFTP. I'm going to select the incoming configuration that will pull the information from F&O, and I'm going to select the outgoing configuration that will write XML files to the SFTP directory. And I'm going to make this route a real-time processing. So by default, Alumio is asynchronous, and we have two steps. The first step is to pull the data to Alumio. This will create a queue, and then on a separate process, we are going to process this queue. So this is especially useful when you're reading lots of data from a system, but your destination system is not that performant, so you need to spread the load. So what you can do one API call, or you can read one file that contains 50,000 products, and then separately you can send 100 of those products to that destination system. But in this case, we are only having 10 order headers, so we're going to do real-time processing. So as soon as the API call is finished, the files will be created on the file system. So let's go ahead and press save. So now when I go back to this incoming configuration and I run it, you can see that it has been consumed. Now when I go back to the dashboard, we can also see that there's one task, and we can also see this failed. So let me just click ahead and we will be brought to the task overview page again. So let me just briefly go over what we see here. So we have an identifier, which is just this unique field for Alumio to recognize a task. Then we have the entity type and the entity identifier. And the entity type and the entity identifier are actually quite useful, because the entity type can be used to automatically validate data, but also to set the entity identifier. So right now we are working with sales orders. So ideally, what I would like to see is the sales order reference as the entity identifier. Then if something goes wrong with that specific sales order header or that specific sales order, then it's really easy for me to find all the tasks that belong to that specific sales order, and it's way easier for me to debug. Right now, the entity identifier is a hash, so I'm not sure what we are looking at. So I really have to investigate what's happening, which is not that useful. But yeah, we will get in that in just a second. Then we have a status. So in this case, it failed. So I will just show you why it failed. We have a route. We can see how late it was created, how late the last mutation has been, and we have some action. So we can also retry this task if we would like to. So now it disappears from the failed list. If I remove this filter, we can see it's new again. So now if I open this task and I go to the entity data, here we can actually see what we got back from F&O. So we can see the 10 sales order headers that we retrieved from F&O, as we would expect. Now when I go to the import messages, we can see those the API call to F&O. And when we go to export messages, we can see the issues. So here we can see a warning or an error was given that the key order number has not been found. So let me just take you back to what we just did. So if we go to this outcome configuration, we can see that we create this outcome configuration that writes files to a file system. And down here at the path field, we selected a custom path and we said, okay, you need to create a path based on this order number. Well, this order number is not available because that's not how it's called in F&O. So in a lot of cases, you're going to get data from a system in the format that the system offers, but you have to make it compatible with the system where it's going to. So for this purpose, we have to apply transformers, which we haven't done in this case. So let's start by creating our first custom transformer. So I'm going to go back to my task. I'm going to go back to the entity data, and I'm going to copy this entity data. So now we'll go to connections and then to entity transformers. And we are going to create a new transformer. So at the right side, we have a transformer tester. Let me make it a little bit bigger. So here we can put in our input data. So this is the data this is the data before this transformer is executed. And then we can start by configuring our transformer. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a transformer. We are going to call it map D365 F&O sales order header to XML file, something like this. Okay, so let's start by creating the first transformer. We are going to do a chain multiple entity transformers because we are going to solve multiple problems within this transformer. The first one is that we only have one task, even though we have 10 sale order headers. And ideally, we want a task for each unique entity, because then if that entity contains an error, only that specific entity will fail, but the rest of your integration can still carry on like nothing is wrong. So what we want to do, we want to split this up. So the first transformer we are going to use is the get branches from a pattern. So the get branches from a pattern will basically take an array as input, and for each underlying item, it will create a unique object, and that unique object will then become a task. So now if I provide a pattern, which will be value.star, because here, if we take a look at our entity data, we can see that we have a key named value, and we have, which is an array that contains objects. So each object will represent a sales order header. So when I press run test, we can see that we receive a response, and now each of the objects has been split up. So that's step one. Then the second step is we need to remap the fields. So if we take a look again at our outcome configuration, we are saying, okay, we want to take data of an order number field, and we want to fill the contents of the XML file with the contents of the order XML key. So both keys don't exist, so we need to make sure those exist. So what are you going to do? We're going to, in our transformer, I'm going to do a move using a pattern. I'm going to move everything. I will do a star. I'm going to move it to order XML.$1. So now when I hit run test, we can now see that for each object we have an order XML key. So that's step one. So we now have the contents of our XML file. But now we still need the order number, because otherwise Alumio cannot create the file names. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add another transformer. I'm going to use the value setter. The key will be order number, because that's what we decided in the outcome configuration. And we are going to take the value of our data. So in this case, I'm going to look for a unique field in this data. So I believe there will be a sales order number field here. So yeah, let's just carry on with the assumption that this field is unique. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create as a placeholder, so it will become a variable. And now I can fill this field dynamically. So in this case, I'm going to say, okay, take the value of order XML dot sales order number. So now what Alumio will do, it will add a key named order number, and it will fill it with the value of order XML dot sales order number. Or with other words, it's going to look for the key order XML. It's going to assume it's an object. And so within the order XML key, it will look for the sales order number key that we just had here. So when I hit run test, we can see we now also have the order number key. But we will have one more issue, because right now we did not define an entity type. So we will still, if we take a look at the task overview that we have, we will still have, for the new tasks, we will have an entity type default, and we will still have an entity identifier that doesn't really say anything. So what we're going to do, we are going to define a custom entity type, which we can use to set this entity identifier. So I'm going to go to clients and then to entity types. I'm going to add a new entity type, and an entity type in this case will be D365 F&O sales order, something like this, header. Then down here, we can define a identifier path, and this identifier path will be order number. So we are going to take the value of the order number field and display it in the task overview. So I will hit save. I will go back to my transformer. I'm going to configure the last transformer that we are going to do, and it will be the set the entity type. And now I'm going to assign the entity type that we just created, the D365 F&O sales order header. I'm going to hit save. Okay, so now what we did, we created this transformer, it was created, now we can apply it to our integration. So if we go back to our connections and then to routes, select the route that we just created. I'm going to add the transformer that we just created, map the sales order header to XML file. Okay, going to hit save. Now we will run the incoming configuration again. So we will take a little bit longer. Okay, we can see the subscriber has been consumed. And now when I go back to the task overview, we can now see that we have 10 new tasks. We have a new entity type that we just defined. We have an entity identifier, which is the order number. So we can now, okay, let's say there's an issue with order number 9. All I have to do, I go to filters. I look for entity identifier 09, something like this. And then we'll only get the tasks that belong to that specific entity. So it's way easier for me to find specific pieces of data within my integration. Yes, now when I open this task, I go to the export messages. We can see it has been finished. So now let me just quickly switch my screen to the FTP location. Now we can see that we have all the files created here with Alumio -order number.xml. So now let me open one of those files. So it's a little bit small, but as you can see, Alumio now created an XML file for this specific order header. So this way we just used Alumio to create our custom integrations. Okay, so to recap what we did, we created an integration between Dynamics Finance and Operations to pull sales order headers and send those sales order headers after some transformations to the SFTP location. So we started by creating the endpoints. So we first had Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations uses a REST API. So we created an HTTP client for this. And this HTTP client contains all the shared information for whatever endpoint data endpoint you're going to consume. We created a file system in order to interface with this SFTP directory. So this allows us to write files to an external system, but we can also use the same file system to read the files from that system. So we can also do it the other way around. So maybe another system is putting files on the SFTP directory, which we have to read and import into Dynamics F&O. We can also use those same configurations for this. Then what we did is we created an incoming configuration, which uses a custom HTTP subscriber in order to read the sales order headers from Dynamics F&O or Finance and Operations. We created a outgoing configuration that's configured to connect to that SFTP directory and write a XML file to it. And then we created the transformer that's responsible for splitting the single API call to multiple tasks, then introducing the keys that we need. So we define this order XML key, we define the order number key. And to make the integration even better, we applied an entity type in order to set that entity identifier to make it more easy to administer the integration. So now all there is left to do for me is create a scheduled job, because right now I have to run this manually. So what I would do is I would go to settings, then to the scheduler. I would define a job and I would call this get sales order headers from F&O and send to SFTP, something like this. I would select the incoming configuration job. I would select the incoming configuration that we created, and then how often I want it to run. So let's say I want to run it every minute. I will hit save, and now Alumio will automatically pull those sales order headers to Alumio and send an XML file to the SFTP location.
If you are interested in experiencing the ease of creating integrations with Alumio, here's all you have to do. First, install the API plugin from Microsoft AppSource. Then sign up for Alumio's iPaaS via Alumio's website or your partners. After your iPaaS is delivered, configure and create mappings to implement your integration. You can now use Alumio's user-friendly interface to modify the integration according to your business needs, as shown in the demo. And by continuing to use Alumio's iPaaS, your business is ready for digital growth by adding more systems and software. To learn more about how to use Alumio's features to improve your integrations, our support portal provides detailed videos and lots of tutorials on working with the Alumio user interface. Working with Alumio only needs you to have knowledge of data structures, the ability to read XML or JSON files, and a love for working with user interfaces. You can also request workshops to help you build your integrations, and you can always get in touch with our support team for any queries. In order to access our integration platform, you can subscribe to one of our plans. Both versions enable you to use integration templates for setting up faster integrations. The platform helps users quickly add new software, get notified of errors, have all connections centralized in one place, and reduce your total cost of ownership. The shared solution is great for when you're starting your first integration and want to run it via a partner instead of by yourself. The partner can use all Alumio integration tools and access our dashboard and logging on your behalf. Your integrations run on shared power and resources. You can always upgrade to the dedicated edition when you want to manage and modify integrations yourself or are ready to upscale in the future. The biggest difference with the dedicated edition is that it allows you to access Alumio's integration features and monitoring dashboard in order to create or change integrations and to fix hiccups yourself. This version also includes dedicated cloud space and power for your integrations. For connecting two systems, you need the Professional Edition, which includes 8 integration routes. If you want to connect 4 systems, for example, ERP, eCommerce, PIM, and CRM, and have unlimited data integrations, you'll need the Business Edition. And to connect 10 systems or more, you need the Premium Edition, or a custom setup which is provided as an Enterprise Edition. Our prices can be found on our website and are simple to understand, transparent, and predictable. The shared solution can only be ordered via Alumio's partners and is more competitively priced than the dedicated edition. Onboarding workshops can be offered via Alumio or our partners. The API plugin has a monthly fee for delivered services per group. The integration templates can be ordered via alumio.com, and the implementation can be done by yourself or your partner. If you would like to have your complete project run by a partner, you can find Alumio's partners on our website, or simply get in touch with us to connect you to one. We look forward to you joining our prestigious family of customers for whom we proudly create future-proof integrations.